Tonight, a child is about to disappear forever. Not because she's sick, not because she's hungry, but because the fire keeping her family alive is about to die. 40,000 years ago, there were no cities, no hospitals, no police, no electricity, no houses, just endless wilderness. And once the sun disappeared, the world belonged to something else. Deep inside an ancient forest, one small tribe huddled together inside a cave. At the center of that cave burned a single fire. It wasn't there for comfort. It wasn't there for cooking. It was the only thing standing between 23 human beings and extinction. An 8-year-old girl named Alice slept peacefully beneath an animal hide blanket. She had no idea that beyond the edge of the firelight, something was watching. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind, only darkness. Then, a branch snapped. Once, then again. Heavy footsteps echoed through the trees. Inside the cave, an old man slowly opened his eyes. Everyone else was asleep, but he knew that sound. He looked toward the fire, and his heart sank. Only a few glowing embers remained. If the fire died, the light would disappear, and if the light disappeared, the hunters of the night would move in. The old man reached for the last piece of dry wood. He placed it onto the dying embers. Nothing happened. He leaned forward and gently blew into the ashes. Once, twice, again. For one terrifying moment, nothing. Then, a tiny orange spark appeared. The spark became a flame. The flame grew brighter. The cave filled with warm light once again. Outside, several wolves stopped at the edge of the firelight. They stared into the cave, watching, waiting, but they never crossed the light. After a long moment, they slowly turned and disappeared back into the darkness. Alice opened her eyes. "They're gone," she whispered. The old man looked into the flames and quietly replied, "No, they're waiting." He placed one hand gently on her shoulder. "Never forget this night. Because one day, people will forget that this," he looked back at the fire, "is the only reason we're still alive." Chapter 1. The World Before the Flame. The next morning, the forest looked peaceful. Golden sunlight filtered through the towering trees. Birds sang from the branches. A gentle breeze moved through the leaves. If you had arrived at that moment, you would never have believed that death had been standing just outside the cave only a few hours earlier. Alice walked quietly behind her grandfather. She couldn't stop thinking about the wolves, or what he had said. "They're waiting." The words echoed inside her mind. After a few minutes, Grandfather suddenly stopped. He slowly knelt beside the ground and brushed away a layer of leaves. "Come here," he said softly. Alice stepped closer. At first, she saw nothing. Then, she noticed it. A footprint. Not a human footprint. Not even close. It was enormous. Almost twice the size of her own foot. Fresh. Grandfather placed his weathered hand inside the track. "It came close last night." Alice looked around nervously. "Is it still here?" Grandfather smiled. "If it were, you'd never hear it." Predators didn't survive because they were stronger. They survived because they were patient. They waited. They watched. And when the time was right, they attacked. Grandfather stood up and continued walking deeper into the forest. Alice followed without saying another word. A short distance later, he stopped again. This time, there were no footprints. Instead, there was silence. He pointed toward the ground beneath an old fallen tree. Scattered among the leaves were ancient bones. Time had turned them pale. Some were almost buried beneath the earth. Alice's face changed. What happened here? Grandfather remained silent for a moment. Then he finally answered. This family lost their fire. Alice stared at the bones. Did an animal do this? Maybe. Maybe hunger. Maybe winter. But one thing is certain. They didn't survive. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The forest suddenly felt much larger, much colder. Alice looked back toward the cave, now barely visible through the trees. She had always believed the fire was there to keep everyone warm. Now, she understood something far more important. The fire wasn't protecting the cave. It was protecting the people inside it. As they walked home, Alice asked a question every child eventually asks. "Grandfather, who gave us fire?" He looked toward the morning sun. "I've spent my whole life wondering the same thing. Some people believe it fell from the sky. Others believe it came from the mountains. And some say it was a gift from the gods." He smiled. "But I know one thing. Without fire, we would never have become who we are." That evening, the tribe gathered around the sacred fire once again. Before anyone touched the food, before anyone spoke, every member of the tribe quietly looked into the flames. There were no temples, no churches, no books, only fire. Long before written history, many ancient people believed the flame itself was sacred, not because they worshipped it, but because they understood what it truly meant. When the fire burned, children survived, families stayed together, predators remained in the darkness. Hope lived one more night. For ancient humans, fire wasn't just a tool, it was tomorrow. And although they could never have imagined electricity, or cities, or the modern world, they already understood one truth. Every future begins with a single flame. Chapter 2. The Greatest Treasure on Earth. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen. The entire tribe was already awake. No one spoke. Everyone knew it was time to move. The berries around the valley had disappeared. The nearby river had begun to dry. The animals they hunted had already migrated north. If the tribe stayed, they would slowly starve. One by one, everyone packed what little they owned. Stone tools, wooden spears, animal hide blankets, woven baskets, everything they needed to survive could be carried on their backs. Alice watched as each family prepared for the journey, but then she noticed something strange. Grandfather wasn't packing food. He wasn't packing clothes. He wasn't even packing his spear. Instead, he walked toward the sacred fire. He slowly knelt beside the glowing embers. With careful hands, he pushed away the black ash. Hidden beneath it, a tiny ember still glowed. It was no larger than a walnut. Grandfather gently placed it into a small pouch lined with dry moss. Then he carefully tied the pouch to his belt. Alice couldn't understand. She looked at him and asked, "Why don't we just make another fire tonight?" Grandfather smiled, then asked her a question. "Can you make the sun rise?" Alice laughed. "No." "Can you make the rain stop?" She shook her head. "No." Grandfather looked at the small leather pouch hanging from his belt. "Then why do you think making fire is easy?" Alice had never thought about it before. The fire had always been there, every morning, every night, burning, waiting. She had never actually seen anyone create it from nothing. To her, fire felt permanent. To Grandfather, it was fragile. The journey began. Hour after hour, the tribe crossed rivers, climbed rocky hills, and disappeared deep into the endless forest. The children became tired. The hunters carried heavy loads. Everyone stumbled at least once. When someone dropped food, they simply picked it back up. When someone dropped a spear, another hunter retrieved it. But every time Grandfather stumbled, the entire tribe stopped walking. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Alice finally asked, Why does everyone wait for you? The tribe's leader smiled. We're not waiting for him. We're waiting for tomorrow. By afternoon, dark clouds filled the sky. The wind grew stronger. Then the rain began. At first, it was gentle. Within minutes, it became a storm. Cold rain soaked every blanket, every basket, every piece of wood. The hunters covered their tools. The mothers protected their children. Grandfather protected only one thing, the leather pouch. He held it tightly beneath his animal hide clothing, shielding it from every drop of rain. Alice stared at him in confusion. It's only a tiny ember. Grandfather looked at her and quietly replied, No, it's 23 lives. The storm continued through the night. When the tribe finally stopped to rest, everything around them was wet. The wood, the grass, the trees. There was nothing dry enough to burn. The darkness slowly surrounded them. For the first time in her life, Alice saw fear in the eyes of every adult. Not because of wolves, not because of the storm, but because there was no fire. Grandfather slowly opened the leather pouch. Inside, the tiny ember still glowed, weak, barely alive. He carefully placed it inside a nest of dry moss he had protected throughout the journey. The tribe gathered around him. Nobody spoke. Even the children remained silent. Grandfather leaned forward. He took one slow breath. Nothing. A second breath. Still nothing. The silence became unbearable. One more breath. Then suddenly, a tiny orange spark appeared. Another, then another, within seconds. A small flame rose into the darkness. The cave filled with warm light once again. Relief spread across every face. Some smiled, some laughed, some quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Alice looked at the small fire in amazement. Only now did she understand. The tribe had never been protecting the fire. The fire had been protecting them. Thousands of years later, archaeologists would discover ancient hearts buried deep inside caves across Africa, Europe, and Asia. Some of those fires burned continuously, for generations, not because ancient humans loved fire, but because they knew something we often forget. Fire wasn't simply a tool. It wasn't convenience. It wasn't comfort. It was survival itself. Every generation inherited one responsibility: protect the flame. Because if the flame survived, humanity survived. Chapter 3. The day fire changed the human mind. As winter slowly faded, life returned to the forest. The rivers began to flow again. Birds returned to the trees. The tribe survived. But something else had changed, something no one could see. One evening, after a successful hunt, the tribe gathered around the sacred fire once again. Fresh meat rested beside the flames. Alice watched as one of the hunters tore a piece of raw meat with his teeth. He struggled. His jaw tightened. He chewed and chewed. It took nearly a full minute to swallow a single bite. Grandfather smiled, without saying a word. He picked up another piece of meat and held it over the fire. Fat dripped onto the flames. The smell slowly filled the cave. Every child looked toward the fire. Every hungry stomach waited. A few minutes later, Grandfather handed the cooked meat back to the hunter. This time, he took one bite, then another. He smiled. It's soft. Alice looked confused. How? Grandfather pointed toward the flames. The fire has already done the hard work. Alice sat beside him. But it's still the same meat. Grandfather nodded. Yes. But now your body doesn't have to fight it. He paused for a moment, then asked, if you spend less energy chewing and less energy digesting, what happens to the energy you save? Alice thought carefully. I don't know. Grandfather smiled. It becomes a gift. He gently tapped her forehead. A gift for this. Of course, Grandfather had no idea what a brain was. He didn't know about biology, or evolution, or calories, but somehow he understood the result. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans had spent most of their lives simply trying to survive, finding food, chewing food, digesting food. Fire quietly changed all of that. Cooking softened meat. It unlocked nutrients. It made dangerous foods safer to eat. And perhaps most importantly, it gave the human body something it had never had before. Extra energy. Nature never wastes energy. Every extra calorie must go somewhere, and over thousands of generations. That energy began building something extraordinary. Not bigger muscles, not sharper teeth, a bigger mind. Slowly, almost invisibly, the human brain grew. Generation after generation, children remembered more. Hunters planned further ahead. Families prepared for winters that had not yet arrived. The weakest creature on Earth was becoming the smartest. Later that night, Alice looked toward the darkness outside the cave. The wolves had returned. They watched from beyond the firelight, exactly as they always had. She turned toward Grandfather. If fire is so powerful, why don't they use it? Grandfather stood up. He picked up a burning branch from the sacred fire and walked toward the cave entrance. The wolves immediately stepped backward, not because they understood fire, because they feared it. Grandfather watched them disappear into the trees, then quietly said, "They can see the fire, but they can never imagine what it could become." Alice frowned. "What do you mean?" Grandfather returned to the cave. He picked up a piece of charcoal from the edge of the fire, then slowly began drawing on the cave wall. A mammoth, a river, hunters, spears, a path through the valley. Alice stared at the drawing. "But tomorrow hasn't happened yet." Grandfather smiled. "No, but I can imagine it. That moment may have been the greatest turning point in human history, because the greatest gift fire ever gave us wasn't warmth, it wasn't protection, it wasn't cooked food, it was time. Time to sit together, time to observe, time to ask questions, time to imagine a future that didn't exist yet. Every invention, every city, every bridge, every ship, every kingdom, every scientific discovery, and every dream that has ever changed the world began the same way, with someone sitting beside a fire, imagining something that wasn't there. As the flames crackled, tiny sparks drifted into the night sky. Alice watched them rise higher and higher. "They look like little stars," she whispered. Grandfather looked up, then smiled. Or maybe the stars look like little fires. Neither of them could possibly know that one day their descendants would look back at Earth from space, carrying a different kind of fire. The same curiosity that began around a campfire would eventually carry humanity to the stars. Chapter 4. The first story ever told that night. The tribe didn't go to sleep immediately. For the first time in many days, there was enough food. The children laughed. The hunters relaxed. The fear that had followed them through the winter slowly disappeared. Only one thing continued to move: the fire. Its flames danced across the stone walls of the cave. Every flicker created new shadows. Sometimes those shadows looked like animals. Sometimes they looked like giants. Sometimes they looked almost alive. Alice couldn't stop watching them. She whispered, "Grandfather, why do the shadows move?" Grandfather smiled. "The shadows aren't moving. Our minds are." He reached toward the edge of the fire, picked up another piece of charcoal, and walked toward the cave wall. Slowly, he began drawing. A mammoth, then another, then several hunters. Finally, a long wooden spear. Alice watched every movement. When he finished, she quietly asked, "Why do you always draw the hunt?" Grandfather looked at the picture, then looked back at Alice. "Because one day, I won't be here," she frowned. "But I'll remember." Grandfather smiled. "You will. But what about your children? And their children?" Alice looked back at the drawing. For the first time, she understood. The drawing wasn't for today. It was for people who hadn't even been born yet. Grandfather sat beside the fire. The rest of the tribe slowly gathered around him. No one asked him to begin. They simply waited. He pointed toward the drawing on the wall, then quietly spoke. "There was once a hunter who followed a mammoth across the frozen valley." The children immediately leaned closer. He became cold. He became hungry. He became tired. And he wanted to give up. Alice interrupted. "Did it really happen?" Grandfather laughed softly. "Maybe. Maybe not." She looked confused. "If it's not true, why tell it?" Grandfather looked around the cave. "If a story teaches you how to survive, it becomes more valuable than truth." The cave became silent. Outside, the wind continued to blow through the trees. Inside, something extraordinary was happening. The oldest hunter wasn't teaching people how to throw a spear. He was teaching them how to remember. Before books, before schools, before writing, there were stories. Stories carried knowledge farther than footprints, farther than memory, farther than a single lifetime. A hunter could die, but his lessons could survive forever. Generation after generation, the stories became larger. Hunters became heroes. Heroes became legends. Legends became myths, and myths became the foundation of civilization itself. Thousands of years later, people would gather around different kinds of fires. Oil lamps, candles, fireplaces, televisions, movie screens, smartphones. The light would change. But the reason people gathered never would. To listen, to learn, to remember, to imagine. Even today, you are doing exactly what Alice did. You're sitting beside a source of light, listening to a story, passed from one mind to another. The technology changed. Human nature didn't. Grandfather looked once more toward the cave wall. The firelight made the mammoth appear to move. The hunters seemed alive. The children stared in complete amazement. Then he quietly whispered, "A hunt ends, but a story never does." Alice smiled. She finally understood. Fire didn't just keep humans alive. It gave humanity its first classroom, its first library, and perhaps its first dream. Because every civilization begins, not with a king, not with a city, not with a weapon, but with one person, sharing one story, around one fire. Chapter 5. The Last Guardian of the Flame. Winter returned earlier than anyone expected. The rivers froze. The trees stood silent. Even the birds had disappeared. For days, the tribe found almost nothing to eat. The children stopped laughing. The hunters stopped talking. Even the sacred fire burned a little smaller each night. Alice noticed something strange. Every evening, Grandfather sat beside the fire, watching it, not speaking, not moving, just watching, as if he knew something the others didn't. On the 7th morning, the hunters returned, empty-handed. Not a single animal, not a single track, nothing. The leader of the tribe stood before everyone. "If we stay here, we starve. If we leave, we might survive." Silence filled the cave. Then, every pair of eyes turned toward Grandfather. He slowly stood. His body had become weaker. His beard was completely white. His hands trembled with age. But his eyes, still burned with the same determination. He looked at the leather pouch hanging from his belt, then quietly said, "We follow the flame." No one argued. No one questioned him. For decades, Grandfather had protected the fire. If anyone knew the way forward, it was him. Before sunrise, the tribe left the cave. Children walked in the center. Hunters surrounded them. Grandfather walked at the very back, protecting the ember. The journey lasted for days. Snow covered every path. The wind cut through their clothing. Every step became harder than the last. One child became too weak to continue. A hunter lifted him onto his shoulders. An elderly woman slipped on the ice. Two strangers rushed to help her. No one complained. No one was left behind. Because survival had taught them something civilization often forgets. You survive together, or you don't survive at all. On the fourth day, the tribe entered a narrow valley surrounded by towering cliffs. For the first time in days, the wind stopped. Everything became silent. Too silent. Grandfather suddenly raised his hand. "Stop!" The entire tribe froze. Alice looked around. She couldn't see anything. Then, a deep growl echoed across the valley. One, then another, then another. Massive cave lions slowly emerged from the snow. One from the left, one from the right, another behind them. Without realizing it, the tribe had walked directly into a trap. The hunters raised their spears. Children stepped backward. Alice reached for Grandfather's hand. He didn't move. Instead, he slowly opened the leather pouch. The ember inside was fading, barely alive. The freezing wind had almost defeated it. Grandfather searched for dry wood. There was none. Only snow, only ice, only silence. For the first time in decades, the sacred fire was about to disappear. He looked around one final time. Then, without hesitation, he removed the dry animal hide wrapped around his shoulders. It was old, worn, one of the last completely dry things he owned. He tore away a small piece, placed it beneath the ember, then gently leaned forward. He breathed once. Nothing. A second time. Still nothing. The lions stepped closer. The hunters tightened their grip on their spears. A third breath. Nothing. Alice could hear her own heartbeat. Then, a single spark appeared. Tiny, almost invisible. Another followed. Then, a flame. Small, fragile, beautiful. Grandfather lifted the burning torch high into the freezing air. The orange light spread across the valley. The cave lions stopped. They stared at the fire. No one moved. For several long seconds, the entire world stood still. Then, one by one, the lions stepped backward. They turned and disappeared into the white mist. Without a single spear being thrown, without a single battle, the fire had won. Again. That night, the tribe reached safety. Children slept peacefully. The hunters sat silently around the fire. Some smiled. Some quietly wiped tears from their faces. Not because they had defeated the lions, but because they finally understood something. Grandfather had never spent his life protecting the fire. He had spent his life protecting them. Later that night, Alice sat beside him. "Grandfather, were you ever afraid?" He smiled. "Every single night." She looked surprised. "But you never ran." Grandfather placed one gentle hand on her shoulder. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to protect someone else, even when you're afraid." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply watched the flames. Then Grandfather slowly removed the leather pouch from his belt. He placed it into Alice's hands. His voice was barely louder than the crackling fire. "Promise me, no matter what happens, never let the flame die. Tears filled Alice's eyes. "I promise." Grandfather. Chapter 6. The fire never left us. The next morning, the tribe buried Grandfather beneath a circle of stones overlooking the valley. There were no monuments, no written names, no statues. History would never remember who he was, the world would never know his name. But every person standing beside that fire knew exactly what he had given them. Alice stood silently in front of the sacred fire. The leather pouch rested in her hands. Inside, the ember still glowed. For the first time, it belonged to her. She carefully placed another piece of wood onto the flames. No one told her what to do. She already knew. The leader of the tribe walked beside her. "The fire is yours now." Alice looked down at the flames. "I'm afraid." The leader smiled gently. So was he. Years passed. The little girl became a young hunter. The young hunter became a mother. The mother became an elder. And every evening, children gathered around the sacred fire, exactly as she once had. One night, a small boy looked up at her and asked, "Why do we always sit around the fire?" Alice smiled, because she had asked that very same question many years before. She looked into the dancing flames and quietly answered, "Because this is where humans became a family." Around the fire, people didn't just eat. They shared ideas. They solved problems. They planned tomorrow. They comforted one another. They laughed. They cried. They remembered. The fire wasn't only creating warmth anymore. It was creating trust. It was creating cooperation. It was creating civilization. Generations passed. The cave disappeared. The tribe disappeared. Even their language disappeared. The names of Grandfather and Alice were forgotten forever. But the flame survived. It changed. The campfire became clay ovens. Clay ovens became blacksmith forges. Forges became steam engines. Steam engines became power plants. Power plants became electricity. The same force that once protected 23 frightened people inside a cave now powers entire cities. Look around you. The light above your head. The stove in your kitchen. The engine inside your car. The airplane crossing the sky. The computer on your desk. The phone in your hand. Every one of them exist because humans learned to control energy. And that journey began beside a single flame. Tonight, you'll probably sit beneath electric lights. You'll eat warm food. You'll talk with your family. You'll watch a movie. Or maybe you'll watch a documentary like this one without realizing it. You're doing exactly what your ancestors did 40,000 years ago. They gathered around a fire. You gather around a screen. The light changed. The habit never did. For centuries, people have asked, what was humanity's greatest invention? The wheel? The compass? The printing press? Electricity? The internet? Maybe. We've been asking the wrong question, because before every invention, before every empire, before every scientific discovery, before every civilization, someone had to survive. One more night, and for hundreds of thousands of years. That happened because one tiny flame refused to die. Remember the frightened little girl from the beginning of this story? She believed the fire protected her from wolves. She was wrong. The fire was protecting something much greater. It was protecting the future. It protected every child who would ever be born, every story that would ever be told, every dream that would ever become reality, including yours. History usually tells us that humans changed the world with fire. But perhaps history has been telling the story backwards. Maybe fire changed humans first. It taught us patience, responsibility, Cooperation, sacrifice, hope. It forced strangers to become a tribe. It forced families to stay together. It gave us time to think, time to imagine, time to become human. So tonight, before you go to sleep, take one moment and look at the nearest light, a candle, a fireplace, a street lamp, or even the screen you're watching right now. Because somewhere, across countless generations, someone you will never know protected a tiny flame through storms, through winter, through hunger, through fear, so that one day you could live in the light. Maybe the greatest hero in human history was never a king, never a warrior, never an emperor. Maybe it was simply the last person who refused to let the fire die. Final message. Or perhaps the fire never disappeared at all. It simply changed shape. The first flame lit a cave, the next lit a village, then a city, then a nation. Today, it lights the entire world. And tomorrow, it may carry us to places our ancestors could never have imagined. Because every civilization, every invention, every dream still begins with a single spark.